GCSE Biology Topic by Topic. Today we're going to have a look at non-communicable diseases. These are the diseases that you basically can't catch. You get them instead by existing, I suppose. You're born with some of them, and some of them you can pick up from the environment. I'm thinking here now of cancer. You're probably born with it, and somehow something triggers it off. Heart disease. Sometimes you have a predisposition to it. Sometimes we have other bits and pieces here. Alright, I'll do it myself. Right, there we go. Right, so I was trying to put some light on. And we've got various things about heart disease. What causes it? And then there are the self-inflicted things like alcohol, smoking. So let's have a look at some of these. Now, where we start off here are with these basic figures, and we've got the figures here for 2016 and the figures for the year 2000 so far. Now let's see how things have changed since the year 2000. Ischemic heart disease. Let's just try and get rid of that. Right. Ischemic heart disease is the major cause in 2000, and we can see that it's actually gone up by 2016. Strokes, still the second major cause of death. And in 2000, lower respiratory diseases and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. They've basically just swapped places, but again, they're the main killers. And then Alzheimer's and dementia has sort of not necessarily come up, but been basically put in its place, I suppose. And then lung cancer, diabetes, road injury. So these are the top causes of death, and you'll notice that not many of these are communicable. So this one, lower respiratory infections, this is a disease you're going to catch, but look how many of the other ones aren't. How things have changed since 2000, when we had a lot more communicable diseases killing people, and these are gradually disappearing and being replaced by the ones that we can't really do quite so much about. So we've got to look at what are the things that are likely to cause death. What are, if you like, the risk factors? So let's have a look at some of these. The basic risk factors as we come down here are all to do with lifestyle. So lifestyle, things such as smoking, alcohol, they're going to have major effects, but really other ones such as eating. We only have to look at certain cultures and see that they perhaps are rather obese. And we're looking at somewhere like the UK, and the number of obese people in the UK is increasing. And related to the eating, I suppose, is lack of exercise. It's not helped in this time of the COVID-19 outbreak worldwide, people can't get out, they can't do as much exercise. But this trend has been going on for a long time. Then there are a few other things that will also affect, and these are basically environmental. So what sort of things in the environment can affect you? Well, one of these is radiation. And I'm not talking about jumping in here to something like a nuclear reactor, but it is in fact things like the UV radiation from the sun. Some countries are very good now. Australia, very good at trying to cover up because of their high amount of UV, and they're adapting and changing. People are understanding the problems and working on them. So we've got that. There is basically something called secondary smoking, and this is largely being trying to be removed, I suppose, in this world at the moment, especially in this country. We're working on trying to ban smoking, because it's not the person that's smoking that's causing the problem. Well, they're only killing themselves. It's when they start sort of exhaling and start leaving that smoke for other people to breathe in, and this can cause cancers. There are basically these chemicals in and around that will cause carcinogens. These are chemicals that can cause cancer. They are in fact even things like the ionizing radiation, UV. And what we need to do is understand some of these problems. When I was a child, smoking was sort of a everyday popular thing. Everybody did it. There were adverts on TV, there were quite a lot of branding, cool images, and when we started looking at the links between smoking and cancer, one of the big problems we had to try and prove it. We weren't allowed to just say smoking caused cancer. No, we had to have well, I'm only going to sort of take notice if you can prove it. My gran smoked for 50 years and she didn't get cancer, therefore it can't cause cancer. And yeah, there are exceptions, but trying to prove something is quite difficult. So what we need to find is something called a causal mechanism. Something causes something else, and if we're not careful we can get all sorts of ideas. One of the ones that I know of causal mechanisms is churches and pubs. If we go round lots of villages in England, we look at the number of churches and number of pubs. And as we go through some of the villages, we start to notice the more churches there are, the more pubs there are. So we could guess that perhaps churches cause pubs. So the more churches there are, the more public houses there have to be. Perhaps we can even draw a conclusion here that going to church drives you to drink. But they don't. You see, we're just looking at one thing rather than another. And I've seen lots of very interesting causal relationships. And someone says, here is a number, here is something else, and you can see there's a relationship. And maybe there is, but maybe there isn't, because maybe it isn't that churches cause pubs, or perhaps even that pubs cause churches. You know, the more people go to drink, the more they have to go to church to repent. No, it's probably more due to the number of people in a village. The more people there are, the more churches. The more people there are, the more pubs. And if we don't see that, then we get some interesting relationships. I saw a very interesting relationship in one of the books, and that related the number of pirates to global warming. And that's something that's really quite ludicrous to think about, that the number of pirates we might have and the years. So if I draw out perhaps here the number of pirates, and this is years here, we're looking at basically the average temperature here, and we're going to plot the number of pirates, and we find that we get some sort of relationship. So we're seeing that here obviously global warming causes more pirating, and just plotting number of pirates doesn't mean anything, does it? It means simply that these two are perhaps related by something else. Perhaps trade. The more trade there is, the more it's affecting global warming, because it's basically making more goods, needs more energy creates perhaps global warming, and the more trade there is, more opportunity for pirating. So we have to be very careful when we look at what causes something else. And let's go back now and have a look at these non-communicable diseases. Every serious disease has an impact on the individual and of course their family. Basically, all the local communities have a lot of problems with this, because diseases cost nations a lot of money. So if we look at some of the diseases, then basically heart disease is our number one killer, and our number two killer, strokes. Now, heart disease we can do quite a lot with. This is quite a lot to do with diet. This is quite a lot to do with exercise. If you eat well but sensibly, if you take a good amount of exercise, this can seriously damage this rise in heart disease. Strokes are a little bit more difficult here. Generally, a stroke is caused by a blockage. So there's something in your body, we're going to get a blockage. If we get the blockage, if it blocks perhaps your leg, well, you've got no blood supply to your leg. Now, although that may be not very good and you could lose a leg, it's not going to kill you. Whereas if we get a blockage to the heart, well, that's your heart attack, and well, death is going to follow probably. A stroke isn't probably quite as bad. Let's just move that out of the way, because a stroke doesn't have to kill you. I know my father suffered many minor little strokes, the so-called mini strokes. They didn't kill him. They were an inconvenience. They were a bit of a problem, but he survived them. But it showed an underlying problem. What caused the blood clots? And then if the blood clots escape and then they sort of stick in part of your brain or heart or leg or arm, then they're going to cause a lot of problems. So what causes the blood clots? Well, various things can cause them, but largely it's something to do with diet. So we can put this one down as well as diet. People who are more likely to get a stroke, this isn't all by any stretch of the imagination, but are more likely to get a stroke, have usually dietary problems. So diet is important, and generally people in not a country but many countries, they eat too much. In the sort of so-called Western world, food is aplenty and people can eat, and they can eat too much, and we have to worry about this idea of diet. So we've got these risk factors. A non-communicable disease then can't be passed from one person to another like an infectious diseases, but it's basically related a lot of things to your lifestyle, the things that are present in your body, or the things that are in the environment around you, and those are going to increase your likelihood of disease. And looking back at these, we can see that from 2000 to 2016, diseases are on the way out. We can't do much about the road injury. These are just accidents that are happening. But we're now looking at the world changing, and this is globally, and the only thing we can do about this is think about reducing our risk factors, trying to reduce the things that are going to potentially cause heart disease, a stroke, or cancer. So let's think about what is a cancer and what we can do about it. So very simply, and I apologise to all doctors at this point, a cancer is a cell which decides for one reason or another to carry on growing. Now most cells grow and they reproduce, and they grow and they reproduce, and then they stop. But for some reason a particular cell starts reproducing and growing, and it does this in an uncontrolled way, so it doesn't stop. So this cell starts to grow. So let's give ourselves a very simple example here. I've got a tube and I've got a cell here that's going to grow, and this one starts growing, and the other ones start growing, and the other ones start growing. and now we're starting to get a lump, and this lump is basically going to block something, and that is largely how a cancer works. We can divide our cancers into two types, and these are benign cancers, or we have the malignant cancers. Let's look at benign cancers first. These are growths of abnormal cells, but they're generally in one place, and often they're inside some sort of membrane. Now this makes them possibly easier to remove than the malignant ones. A benign tumour, however, grows very fast. And basically, if it's growing very fast, then this is putting pressure on an organ, or may literally be damaging an organ, ripping it apart. And this is going to cause severe problems here. These are going to be life-threatening. If this is happening in the brain, then this is growing, putting pressure on a large amount of the brain, and this will probably kill. Malignant tumours are maybe perhaps worse, because these simply spread around the body. And often when we talk about benign tumours, we talk of that as a benign tumour, whereas malignant, we typically talk about this as cancer. A malignant tumour then basically will spread out. It basically splits up, and as it does so, it's going to enter things like the bloodstream, or it's going to enter the lymphatic system. These basically are going to circulate everything around the body, and so instead of having one cancer, now we could have a whole load of little areas with little growths occurring, forming secondary tumours. These again divide more rapidly than normal cells, and worse, they live longer. This tumour usually disrupts all the normal tissues, and if left untreated, of course, it's going to kill the person. But the problem is, these are very difficult to operate on, because instead of having one thing in one place to remove inside a membrane, here we've got this not in a membrane, so we need to cut out not just the cancer, removing every one of the cancer cells, because if we leave one, it's going to grow and grow and grow. So we start having to remove more tissue around this, and then we need to use other systems such as radiotherapy, which is involving in dosing the body with gamma radiation. Now this isn't going to actually do anyone any good. Or we can do chemotherapy. Chemotherapy, we're going to give people drugs that will kill cells that grow rapidly. Well, that's not too bad, except of course here it's going to kill good cells that are growing rapidly, and this isn't going to do many people much good. So let's jump in and try and go for some causes of cancer. And the answer to this is basically we don't know. We don't know what causes a lot of cancers, but some of the causes are known. We can have some genetic factors here, that if your mother has had cancer, then it's likely or more likely that you will have that cancer, because it's genetic. It's passed down from mother, father to son to daughter. Sometimes these are a result of a mutation. Some chemicals are known to do this. One is asbestos. Tar. The tar we find in tobacco smoke. These are our carcinogens. Other things such as ionizing radiation, which is things like UV light, X-rays. Now, I'm not saying that X-rays do cause cancer, it's the amount that does this. So if you just go to the dentist and have an X-ray on your tooth, then it's a calculated risk. The amount of X-rays they give you, however, is less than the amount that you will get by just walking out for a year in the sun, because out there we've got UV, X-rays and various other things. And when we get these, we get problems like this. Now, when I was born, I didn't have these. I've managed to acquire these through my life. How did I get them? This is exposure to the sun, to UV, to X-rays, to all sorts of things. Now, these aren't harmful. They are only harmful if you notice that they suddenly start to grow. And if they do, then you've got to get them treated really quickly. There are a few of these causes of cancer which are actually caused by viruses, and possibly one of the ones that are known are Hpv, Human Papillomavirus, and it's known there is a relationship between this and cervical cancer. So teenagers nowadays are vaccinated against Hpv, and this should stop the virus causing cervical cancer. Some cancers are going to be easier to notice than others. If you've got a skin melanoma, something growing on your skin, you're going to probably notice it. There's a lot of treatment nowadays for breast cancer. Not something that's just women, of course, but men can get as well. And it's a little bit more noticeable if there's a lump and you can feel the lump. But if you've got a lump perhaps on your liver, you're not going to notice that one really until you start exhibiting some symptoms from a blockage or damage, and by then it's often too late. So some cancers we can detect a bit quicker. Skin, obviously, and you can go into the doctor and say, yes, I've got this on my skin, it's growing, and they can say, yes, look, that's a melanoma. We can chop it out quite easily, we can see it, and we can remove it usually before it's got too big. Whereas if you've got something else, a brain tumour, very hard to detect. Someone's behaving differently. Well, maybe they're just behaving differently, and then they start to behave a lot worse and they have lots of other symptoms, and it's one of those things that you can't quickly go and take perhaps an X-ray because the brain inside the skull, so the X-rays won't work, so we have to use other imaging techniques to try and get those to be detected. And so we go in and we have an MRI and they say, oh yeah, look, there's a lump. Now if it's on the outside, we can probably operate, but if it's deep inside the brain, well, if we've got to get in there, we're going to have to damage a fair bit of the brain to sort of get in there, and if we're going to do that, we're probably going to kill you, and so some of these are going to be inoperable. So cancers, various different causes, we don't know all of them, and trying to stop them is difficult because it's a cell much like every other cell in your body. It's just growing uncontrollably. And if you want to know how we try and start to tackle this, then have a look at the previous video on... No, didn't get the one on something called monoclonal antibodies and antibodies to try and fix these problems. Right, the next topic I want to have a quick look at is related to all this, which is smoking. Not something that I'm very happy with because I don't smoke, I never have smoked, I've never wanted to smoke, yet as I go around I am affected by people who are smoking. So smoking, 2-3 obvious things that affect us. First of all, we've got nicotine. Now, nicotine is a drug and it's the addictive drug. So it's highly addictive. It is relatively harmless, but it's found in tobacco smoke, and it produces this sensation of calm, of well-being, of being able to cope, and this is why a lot of people like smoking. It actually doesn't do what you think it does. See, although you may feel calm, you may not be. You have this feeling of well-being, but you still might not be. You might feel that you're able to cope, even though you still can't. It just gives you the feeling that you can. Some of the other chemicals, however, are more lasting and more fatal, and the first of these is carbon monoxide. Now, carbon monoxide is a nice friendly little gas, and what this is known to do is to bind to some stuff called hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is what carries oxygen in your blood, and carbon monoxide can replace this, and once it stays there, it sticks there, it stays there. and so your hemoglobin becomes gradually useless and you're not being able to carry oxygen around to the body. Now this isn't particularly good, and basically in your average smoker this is going to be about 10% of their hemoglobin will be taken out, and this is going to give a shortage of oxygen, and it's why many people who are smokers start sort of having problems when they start doing things like exercise. This also has a direct effect on pregnancy, because if you're pregnant, and this generally applies to women only, then you're not carrying as much oxygen around. Now, a pregnant woman will need to not only oxygenate all herself, but she's got to oxygenate the baby as well as herself. And if there's less to go round, then one of the two is going to suffer, and the baby tends to be the one that suffers the most. And we get a fair number of stillbirths, and these are often related to smoking. So smoking's not good for you, and also we've got a problem here with the smoke coming out and doing secondary smoking and affecting other people. So if you're pregnant and your partner's still smoking, then it can affect you, and that still means you can breathe in the carbon monoxide, and that's still going to affect your baby. So smoking, not really a good idea. So we've got nicotine, we've got carbon monoxide. The next one here, I suppose we ought to put down, is tar. Now, tar, basically thick, heavy chemicals. It's a black chemical that accumulates in the lungs, and it turns them from pink to grey. When I was at university, I managed to see a post-mortem, autopsy, take your pick, and the doctor there said this gentleman had died from lung cancer, and he was having a look at this, and he took out the lung for us while we were watching, and then he poured out some of the tar that was in the lung. And to this day I can still remember the smell of that tar. It was not particularly nice smell that we could, that we basically could smell, and it really has lingered with me, and the thought of that person dying from that black stuff in their lungs basically sort of encouraged me to be put off, although I really didn't want to look at smoking anyway. One, it costs a lot of money, and I often demonstrate to my students a quicker way of smoking. You spend your money and you smoke it. Why not just burn the money? It will just be a lot quicker and probably not as toxic. Yeah, it's not popular. So the build-up of this tar, we know it's a carcinogen. The build-up of this tar is going to damage the lung tissue and eventually cause things like severe breathlessness and death, and it's also going to increase here lung cancer. But then smoking does make you feel calm, and I would imagine people clutching at death here have to remember that it did make them feel calm, even though it was killing them. Lung cancer is not the only one we're going to get. We're going to get cancer of the throat, of the larynx, and the trachea. Smoking is also going to have an effect on the heart. Chemicals in tobacco smoke affect the heart. They affect the blood vessels. And smokers, we've managed to prove, they are more likely to suffer from cardiovascular problems than non-smokers. Smoking here narrows the blood vessels in your skin and ages it. So we can see that we've got all sorts of problems with the cardiovascular system. So skin, but also we've got here arteries. The mixture of chemicals in the cigarette smoke can increase blood pressure. And a combination of cardiovascular disease, problems with the arteries, all these things are going to lead to heart attacks and strokes. So smoking can cause cardiovascular disease. It can cause coronary heart disease. It can cause lung cancer. It can cause lung diseases such as bronchitis and COPD. A fetus exposed to smoke will have restricted oxygen supply and therefore stunted growth. So I'm trying to think of the advantages here of smoking. I feel calm, even though I'm not, but I'm dying. But that's a long way off. So what can we do about all of this? Well, let's see if we can just quickly cover what we can do about this. And this comes in basically two answers, and we've talked about them already. There's diet and there's exercise. The more you eat, the more excess, and it is here with excess food, and excess generally gets stored as fat, and the more fat you have, the more problems you're going to have, the more overweight you're going to be, then obese. Carrying too much weight, it's inconvenient, it's uncomfortable. Trying to run around is much more difficult. In trying to do exercise becomes more difficult. So the food you eat transfers energy to your muscles, and they work from respiration. So the amount of exercise you do affects the amount of respiration in your muscles. The more you exercise, really, the better you are. And we can see there is sort of a simple graph, and if we have the amount of death here, and we look at the active and the not active here, then we're seeing some sort of graph like this. So the more inactive you are, the higher your likelihood of death is than the people who are active. So schools start a system. When you join schools, they start you on a regular regime of physical exercise, PE. What they're trying to instill is this idea of you doing exercise every day, and instill it so that when you leave school you'll do exercise every day, and that will keep you more healthy, and it's going to stop you perhaps having death a little bit earlier than you expect. So exercise is good for you, but people don't like doing exercise. Why don't they like doing exercise? Well, it's hard work, isn't it? And I've got a choice of either doing some exercise or sitting down watching TV. Which would I prefer? But which one's best for you? And that is a lifestyle choice that you have to make. Being fit, healthy means you can get around a lot. You see a lot of people who are older, fatter, don't do much exercise, and they wish they could, but no longer can. And I feel sorry for those people, because they made a lifestyle choice perhaps a long time ago, and perhaps they made the wrong one. And it's up to you to decide what you want to do. Do you want to become fat and have problems later in life, or do you want to stay fit and healthy? And if you want to stay fit and healthy, then literally get on your bike. If you found today's lecture interesting, then give a thumbs up and subscribe, and I will see you again next week when we'll have a look at some more GCSE biology, going through topic by topic. Until then, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.